Hey there everybody, welcome to Auto Bears, and this is the Lexus UX Hybrid. For the last 10 years, if you wanted an entry-level Lexus, you could go for the CT Hybrid hatchback. And although it was a nice little frugal and reliable hatchback, in the last 10 years it's had two midlife facelifts, but fundamentally it's still the same car underneath. So by today's standards, it does feel very dated and cannot compete with its rivals. So Lexus had to do something. And of course, with the modern day trends, they have come up with this, the UX, which is an urban crossover and is a small SUV. They are all the rage, of course, but it still sticks to Lexus's key philosophy, which is by bringing out a petrol hybrid car. Until very recently, where you can now get a fully electric version of the UX, but we're not going to talk about that. We're going to talk about this, the hybrid version, and I've had this UX for a week, and I'm going to let you know if it's a suitable replacement for the CT. When it comes to styling, the UX is instantly recognizable as a Lexus because it follows in Lexus's L finesse design language, which incorporates seamless anticipation, incisive simplicity, and intriguing elegance. I have no idea what any of that means, but essentially you have a car that doesn't look German, and as a result the UX is arguably one of the best looking cars in its class. Particularly at the rear. I mean, it looks brilliant with all the creases and angles on the bodywork, and I just love that light bar going across the width of the rear. Even the tail lights seem to have kind of protruding fins, and that's not a styling choice, that's actually an aerodynamic choice, and allows the air to go over the UX and then get kind of pushed backwards to reduce the amount of drag coming from the SUV. So even though this is a very stylish SUV from Lexus, it's still very aerodynamic at the same time, sticking with Lexus's philosophy of having these petrol hybrid cars. And I personally love the F Sport trim as well. It looks incredibly striking. I do love the spindle grille. Yes, it's not to everyone's taste, but again, it makes it instantly recognizable as a Lexus. And I also love this azure blue paint job, particularly in contrast with the red leather interior. Again, that's not to everyone's taste, but the great thing about buying a Lexus is you can easily customize it to your own taste. But yeah, I think that the UX is an incredibly striking car, instantly recognizable, and that's enough of looking at the outside of the UX. Let's have a little look at the inside. Sat in the front of the Lexus UX, you are greeted by one of the most comfortable and well screwed together interiors in its class. Sitting here is a real joy, and just taking in this wonderful design as well. Now, getting in and out of the UX might be a little bit tricky because it feels more like a raised hatchback rather than an SUV. So if you do suffer from any kind of mobility issues, I do recommend just making sure you're comfortable getting in and out of the UX before making any decisions. And I would recommend something like a BMW X1 or an Audi Q3 as an alternative. And if you click up in the top right hand corner, you can watch my review of the Audi Q3 Sportback. But once you're sat in these seats, you find that they are incredibly comfortable, easily holding a big bear like me in place, and there is plenty of adjustment because they're electrically adjustable on this F Sport trim, and even the steering has got electric adjustment as well, and that's something you don't see in this segment. Next we have interior quality, which is absolutely brilliant. Even the hard touch plastics feel of a decent quality. So we've got soft touch plastics here on the dash, leatherette on top of the dash with contrasting red stitching. Top here we've got soft touch plastic. We've even got two lots of soft touch plastic here on the door panel. Even here on the center console we've got leatherette to rest your knees, and the leather here on top of the armrest is just so soft, it's a joy to rest your arm on it. And even the hard touch plastics, they feel of a really good quality and will easily stand the test of time. A lot of manufacturers could learn a lot from this Lexus. Next we have cubby spaces, which is a little bit of a disappointment here in the UX. We got some okay sized door bins. You can just about get a medium sized bottle of drink in there, but it's not lined with any fabric, so loose items will rattle around a bit. Then in front of the gear lever we've got a couple of cup holders which are rubber lined, which is a nice feature, and you can get a coffee cup or a medium sized bottle of drink in there. However, if you put an energy drink, it's just going to rattle around a bit, so something to be aware of. Just ahead of there we have got wireless charging, and I do love the fact that next to it we've got this 12-volt socket hidden away, and it is really well damped. My only request to Lexus would be is to replace that 12-volt socket with the USBs that are under the armrest. That's my only little quibble here, because it means you can connect it to a phone that's resting on the wireless charging, but that's just me. Then behind the gear lever we have got the centre armrest, and as I've just mentioned, we have got two USB charging inputs and also an aux-in socket, but the space back here is actually pretty decent, and it is lined with fabric. And what I love as well is that your passenger can gain access to this centre armrest, so that's a really nice feature. And I can't lie, I've been kind of showing this off to people when I've been showing them the UX, and they really do like that feature in here. Next then we have got the glove box, which is lockable, and that is really handy. However, when you do open it, you do find that there's hardly any space in there. Now yes, you've got a shelf to put your manual, but underneath there, there's just, well, you can barely get any gloves in there. And it's not lined with any fabric as well, so it does mean that loose items will rattle around a bit. And that's it. There's no other cubby spaces here in the UX or in the front of the UX. We haven't even got a space here to put your sunglasses, which is a bit disappointing. On a positive note, we have got physical controls for the air conditioning and dual zone climate control, so that's a real nice feature. Good to see that Lexus haven't gone the way of Volkswagen Group by having all the controls operated via a touchscreen. And then just below there we have got a CD player. Yes, we actually have a CD player here in the UX, and it is a Mark Levinson stereo, and it's really nice. Then just below that we got a couple of buttons that operate the heated steering wheel and heated and ventilated front seats, because we have got the Takumi pack on this particular car. Then we have got a couple of controls jutting out of the armrest, and these control the radio, volume and basically media controls whilst you're driving along. And I do like them actually, because they do come in very handy if you just want to skip the track, or if your passenger wants to skip the track whilst you're driving along. Behind the gear lever we got a couple of buttons. One does your auto hold for the electric handbrake, and the other puts the car into EV mode if you're doing any kind of slow driving around a residential area. Then we have a plethora of buttons on the steering wheel. On the right hand side they do your adaptive cruise control, and left hand side they do your media controls and the TFT screen. And then on the right hand side, just underneath the air vent, we got the buttons for the 360-degree camera. Then behind, or should I say in front of the steering wheel, we got a 7-inch TFT display, which is really lovely. I love the animations, but it's not as versatile or as customizable as something like the virtual cockpit you get in an Audi, which is a little bit disappointing. However, when you press the backup button on the steering wheel, it does actually move the center dial to the right hand side, and that's something you saw in the old Lexus LFA and also in like the LC Coupe. It is a brilliant feature, and although it's just a little gimmick, it is again something you want to show off, and I just love the animation as it transitions from one to the other, and just looks really nice. And if you use the drive mode select, you can actually get the Sport Plus mode, which looks just like an LFA, although this isn't really a sporty car you want to drive, but we'll get onto that later on. So that is a really nice feature. And there's one more thing we need to discuss before we go sit in the back, and that's the infotainment system. So firstly, the screen. This is the upgraded screen, which is 10 inches, not 7 inches you'd find lower down in the spec range. And I love the screen. I love the clarity, I love the animations. It is really clear to read, particularly when you're on the move. Operating that screen, however, has to be done via a trackpad system, and it's just nowhere as intuitive as something you'd find in either a BMW, Mercedes or an Audi. And the actual screen itself is not a touchscreen, because firstly, it's set so far back in the dash. I mean, not even Mr. Tickle could reach that screen sat here in the driver's seat. And that's a little bit disappointing as well, because that would be the best alternative to navigating the menus. So that's one thing I just want Lexus to really work on. And personally, I got an idea when playing on my Xbox the other day, and that's using like a D-pad system to go up and down and navigate the menus, so you don't have to make the sensitivity a bit over the top. I mean, that's one of the things that really does stand out, is that you can go across the alphabet and you think you're going to the next letter, but you go 5 letters across. and that's just a little bit disappointing. So if Lexus could come up with like a D-pad system and not a trackpad, that would actually really come in handy and be much easier to use, particularly when on the move. Now on the personal side, something else I will mention is that I'm right-handed, so using my left hand to operate a trackpad is really unnatural, because I use my right hand on laptops and such in order, you know, to navigate the screen. So again, that just shows how it just doesn't feel as natural to use as something like BMW's iDrive system, or even just a regular touchscreen. But all in all, it's a bit of a double-edged sword here in the UX. I love the quality, I love the design, I love the layout. It is really lovely in here. It's wonderful in its design. I just wish that the practicality was better, and this infotainment system honestly was just kind of thrown out and something else put in its place, because this is the only system that Lexus have. You can go buy yourself a £70,000 LS, top of the range, flagship for Lexus, and you still get that system. And again, that's very disappointing. But anyway, that's enough of talking about the front of this Lexus UX. Let's have a little look in the back. Sat in the back of the Lexus UX, it does start to get a bit dark and gloomy back here. Now that driver's seat is set to my driving position. I'm 5'7" tall and 5'7" wide, and as you can see, I've got very little in the way of knee room, but headroom is actually a bit better. I did manage to get somebody who's 6 foot tall sat in the back of the UX, and although he did say he felt quite claustrophobic back here, he did praise the seats in terms of comfort, so that is something. You could get 2 adults for a short journey in the back of the UX, but they are definitely more suited to children. Cubby spaces is another thing that's very disappointing back here. So firstly, we have no door bins. I mean, I don't remember the last time I had a 4-door car and there were no pockets in the doors. So that's really disappointing. Also, when it comes to aeroplane style pockets on the backs of the front seats, I haven't got one, but the passenger seat has. So I don't know what the kind of logic was in doing that. However, you do have an armrest which comes down, which is very handy, and you have got a couple of cup holders there. So that is something. However, there's no through loading into the boot or any ski hatch, so you can't load any longer items through into the cabin. And then when it comes to features, we have got a couple of USB charging inputs, so that's very handy if you've got kids back here with mobile devices. The windows themselves are not the biggest, but it doesn't feel as claustrophobic as something like a Toyota CHR back here, and they do open all the way, so that is something as well. When it comes to affixing a child seat, we have got Isofix supports on the outer seats, and there are these plastic cups on there which, although it's nice to kind of easily remove them, you could easily lose them as well. But the only thing I have found is actually that the aperture to get into the back of the UX is quite narrow, because the door doesn't open that wide, and you've also got this plastic panel here which kind of gets in the way. So that's something, again, if you're looking to buy this car, I'd probably recommend not starting a family with it and wait until perhaps the kids have left home, and this is more reserved for taking your friends out for an evening meal or something once lockdown lifts. So it is a bit disappointing here in the back of the UX, particularly when it comes to cubby spaces, but as a blessing, the seats are very comfortable. And that's enough of looking at the back seats of the UX. Let's check out that boot. Now, before I open the boot of the UX, I just want to quickly point out how refreshing it is to have a rear bumper with no fake exhausts in it. So, thank you very much, Lexus. But now, if we open up the boot of the UX, and of course we have a power tailgate on this car, you'd be greeted with 320 litres of space if you went for the 2-wheel drive version of the UX, which this is not. This is the all-wheel drive version of the UX, so we actually have 283 litres. To put that in perspective, my Volkswagen Up GTI has 251 litres of space, so this narrowly beats a city car for boot space, and that is by far the biggest Achilles heel on this UX. It is just nowhere near as practical as its rivals. Now I'm going to get the negatives over and done with first, and then that way we can move on to the positives of the UX's boot. So the boot lip itself is actually very high up, so if you have to load any heavy items, you've got to navigate it over that high boot lip. Also, we have got this quite flimsy parcel shelf, but I do like the fact that under the boot floor we have got a bag for it, so you don't have to leave it in the garage at home. So that is a nice feature. But as you can probably tell, it's a little bit windy out today, and I've had to purposely set this car at an angle so that the wind doesn't catch it, because the other way I had it earlier, I swear this was trying to get out and attack me. So that's just something to be aware of when opening the boot of the UX. But now onto the positives, and there are a few positives. As you saw, there is a little bit of underfloor storage, but if you go for the two-wheel drive version, there is a lot more space under the boot floor. We have got a subwoofer on the side for the Mark Levinson stereo, but we have got some tethering hooks and they look really sturdy. We've got a 12-volt socket, and we actually have a couple of these little shopping hooks here to make sure that your shopping doesn't roll around in the boot. So that is quite handy. And if you do put the seats down, you do get a completely flat load area. So that is another bonus. But all in all, the first thing you're going to see is just that lack of boot space there. And if you are perhaps about to have a young family, I don't recommend the UX. I recommend something like the Audi Q3 or Volvo XC40. If, however, your kids have kind of fled the nest and perhaps you're an older retired couple, then this would be perfect for you, because you can still get roughly a week's shopping in there. But yeah, it's not perfect if you have a family. But you know what? Let's get this Achilles heel aside now on the UX, and let's take it for a drive. Once you get driving in the UX, first impressions are really good. It's an extremely relaxing and comfortable car to be in. It definitely feels like a traditional Lexus. And as I mentioned earlier, it actually feels really safe. You feel like you're cocooned in a big thick sheet of metal, and that's a nice reassuring feeling. In fact, the UX does have a Euro NCAP 5-star rating, so if safety is a priority, then that's definitely good. And then when it comes to visibility, it's actually really good as well. Now, as I mentioned, it feels more like a raised hatchback rather than an SUV, and that's no bad thing. But visibility out the front of the UX is really good, and if you look over your shoulder, you do find there's a bit of a thick C-pillar there. However, I have got blind spot monitoring, and actually the wing mirrors are of a really good size and give a plenty of view, so that will definitely help with your blind spot. And then looking out the back of the UX, yes, it's a bit of a narrow field of view, but it's not too bad, and I got no real complaints. However, because this feels like a raised hatchback and not an SUV, you actually find that the dash and the window sills are quite high up. So if you are navigating, say, a drive-through, and believe me, I've been through a drive-through or two, sometimes you can feel as though you don't know where the front wheels are when you're positioning the car. So you might be afraid you're going to scrape those gorgeous alloy wheels. But luckily, again, we have got a 360 camera on this particular car, and it is part of one of the option packs you can go for, the Takumi pack on this one. And it does mean you get a bird's eye view, and you can do that 3D rotating of the car, so you know exactly where you've positioned it. So that again is very handy. But yeah, in terms of first impressions, it feels really safe, it feels very comfortable. As I said, these seats are amazing, and it feels like a lovely, relaxing car. And of course, this being a hybrid, it can go between petrol engine and electric motor from time to time. And when it's in electric and you're driving at slow speed, again, it's really relaxing and you can't hear anything. So yeah, first thoughts of the Lexus UX once you get driving, very positive. When it comes to trim levels in the UX range, there are 4 to choose from. The entry-level UX, the Premium Sports Edition, the F Sport, which is what I've got here, and the top of the range Takumi. Now that's if you go for the 2-wheel drive version of the UX, but if you go for the all-wheel drive version like I've got here, you don't get that entry-level UX trim. It starts from the Premium Sports Edition and then goes upwards. Now that would be my pick of the range, the Premium Sports Edition, but with the 2-wheel drive layout. That way you save yourself a little bit of money, and also you get a little bit more in MPG. But what is great is that you can add option packs onto your UX, so you can really spec the car to how you want it and give it that personal touch. So there is plenty of options available for you. But if you want to go for the Takumi pack, you get all the bells and whistles, and I think the only standard kit you miss out on is self-parking and a kitchen sink. That's pretty much it. So yeah, the Premium Sports Edition is definitely my pick of the range, but if you do fancy something that looks a little bit more sporty and definitely the best looking of the UX trim levels, then of course you can go for the F Sport. However, you do get things such as run flat tyres, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. Now, there's only one engine choice available in the UX range, and it's a 2-litre naturally aspirated petrol engine, same as what you get in the higher trim levels of the Toyota CHR. So you've got 181 brake horsepower, which means that this UX will hit 62 miles per hour in just 8.7 seconds. So it does feel pretty brisk. However, at the same time, it feels uncharacteristic of the UX to drive in that fashion. This just feels like a very sedate car and relaxing car to drive about in. But it's good to know that that performance is there if you need it. Now, in terms of economy, Lexus has said I should get between 47 and 53 miles per gallon throughout the UX range. 47 for the all-wheel drive version and 53 for the two-wheel drive version. Now, driving around on the motorway, I managed an average of around 41 to 43 miles per gallon, depending on how traffic was, which is not too bad for this type of car. However, driving around town and around Milton Keynes yesterday, I actually got over 55 miles per gallon. Now, that I was really impressed with, because that's above what Lexus have told me. But I would recommend going for the two-wheel drive version of the UX, because you just get a little bit more in the way of economy, and you do save yourself a couple of grand at the same time. Now, the engine is mated to an eCVT gearbox. Now, you're expecting me to tell you that it's an absolutely terrible gearbox and you should go for something with a dual clutch. Not necessarily. Now, being an eCVT and not a traditional CVT, it just feels a little bit more responsive, and pulling away from a standstill, it actually feels quicker than a dual clutch system, which tends to bog down and hesitate a little bit if you're trying to kind of floor it away from the lights. And there's technically kind of 6 gears in this eCVT transmission, but you don't hear it change unless you have it in manual mode. And I'll be honest, I've only had it in manual mode once just to see how many gears there were, because I just don't feel like driving this in manual mode. It's not sporty enough for me to want to show off and change gear that way. But of course, if you get things like snow or poor weather, it's good to know at slow speed you can control what gear you're in. But all in all, the engine and the hybrid system and the gearbox, they do work really well. And again, in a typical Lexus fashion, if you drive in a relaxed manner, it will reward you. It's a lovely, relaxing car to be in. You don't hear the engine unless you floor it or you're at idle and you can hear the engine just in the background. But because this is a Lexus, again, it feels very refined. The engine noise is nicely isolated away from the cabin. Yes, you can still hear it and you know it's there, but it's not as bad as Lexuses of old, including cars like the CT hatchback. So what's the ride refinement and handling like in the UX? Now, this being the F Sport, I have got adaptive dampers, which means if I put it into Sport and Sport Plus mode, that the ride does firm up a little bit. But to be honest, again, like the engine and the performance, you're not going to do that. You're not going to put it into those driving modes because it feels like a much more relaxing car to drive. The only reason I've put it into Sport or Sport Plus is to show everyone the dials, which kind of show it comes straight from an LFA hypercar. And yes, that does look really cool, but that's the only time you're going to show it off. You're going to spend most of your time driving in either normal or eco mode to get the most out of the engine and hybrid system in terms of miles per gallon. But the ride itself is really nice. It's a very comfortable car. Yes, if you go over some of the bumps and imperfections on the road, you can hear them, but for the most part, I mean, okay, that one I did feel, but for the most part you don't actually feel them. You just kind of hear them and then they just kind of, yeah, just come into the cabin. So that's about it. When it comes to the refinement side, however, there's one big intrusion into the cabin, and that is tyre noise. And that's because you've got run flat tyres on this UX F Sport, which I'm not too happy with. I'd rather they just had conventional tyres on this car. And you also get the same on the Takumi trim level as well, which is why I recommend the Premium Sports Edition as the trim level to go for. But I mean, I'm driving now on a smooth bit of tarmac, doing 40 miles an hour, and it feels really nice. It does feel lovely, relaxed and refined. The only intrusion, as I said, is the tyre roar. There's nothing from the wing mirrors, a tiny bit from the A-pillar, but that's about it, and you don't hear the engine. So there is a nice amount of refinement in here, better than, you know, your more kind of conventional SUVs from the Volkswagen group. But at the same time, if they just got rid of those run flat tyres and had conventional tyres on, it would be, I think, much better and also much more comfortable when it comes to the ride side of it. And then we've got the handling, which I'm going to say is really nice in the UX. It's not sporty in any way, shape or form, but going around this roundabout, there's a nice fluidity to the handling of the UX. As you turn the wheel, the front wheels move, and it just kind of, it goes where you want it to go. Now, it's not brimming with feel and feedback like something like a Seat Ateca, but for everyday driving, it's absolutely fine. There's a nice amount of weight to it, but it's not too heavy, so anyone who perhaps is a little bit older and kind of wants a relaxing drive will feel right at home in the UX. And what I love as well is that slow speed maneuvering is really good. You can really whip the UX into a parking space or do a U-turn really easily. So it does feel really nice when you're driving it. So all in all, when it comes to the ride, refinement and handling, it does just all feel really nice. It feels like a Lexus. It's not the best when it comes to handling. It's not the, you know, the sporty feel or anything, but it's by no means the worst. It's just a lovely combination of comfortable and relaxing. And if you are the kind of person who doesn't want a sporty car, then this is definitely one car to look at. So what are my thoughts on the Lexus UX Hybrid? Well, when Lexus get things right, they really do hit the nail on the head. I love the exterior and interior design, the perceived quality and the materials used, but also the actual quality and safety features of the car. This is never going to let you down and will run until the end of time. However, when Lexus get things wrong, they really do get things wrong, and the practicality and infotainment system need to be sorted out. Please, Lexus, just throw this infotainment system away and start from scratch. Even a standard touchscreen will be better than what you've currently got. But also as well, the Lexus is an incredibly comfortable car. As I've said, these seats are wonderful and arguably the best in class. Definitely this and a Volvo XC40 will be the most comfortable seats, but there are plenty more rivals out there, particularly from the German brands, and they do have more variation when it comes to engines and gearboxes, which does again limit what you can do with the UX. On the plus side, however, you can now get a fully electric version of the UX, and that is a step in the right direction for the Japanese brand. So I am looking forward to seeing what else they can come up with, and I look forward to hopefully getting a UX 300e for review, because that would be a very interesting car to drive indeed. But yeah, all in all, the UX is a good car, but it's not a great car. If you're going from a CT and you want to stay with Lexus, this is absolutely brilliant. But if you're after a nice, practical, small SUV, there are better cars out there. So everyone, I hope you've enjoyed my review of the Lexus UX Hybrid. As always, please give this video a like. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell notifications icon to let you know when I, Dave the Auto Bear, bring out a new video. If you've got any questions about the UX and my time with it, please put them down in the comments section below. And are you a Lexus owner, and have I missed anything? Please let me know down below. Of course, I always ask you to follow on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter, and always give that a follow and a like for additional content, including live videos and still images of cars I review and also cars I come across and any shows I go to. But guys, yes, I hope you have enjoyed this review of the Lexus UX and I have answered questions for you. But it is, yeah, it's a nice quirky car and I look forward to working with the brand again. But guys, I hope you're all staying safe, maintaining your social distancing, washing your hands and wearing a mask, and I'll catch you all in the next video. So take care and bye-bye.